I think I've always, like, for a long time as well, kind of resisted that title, or that kind of, being labelled as having a disability or a chronic illness.
It's definitely partly about my health, but it is also about other people's attitudes and the way that things that people will say to you.
And it's a really complicated question, and I'm still coming to terms with it. My diagnosis was 3.5 years ago. And it's really difficult because, on the other hand, my life is more like someone who's chronically ill, who has periods of going, actually, I'm not affected by it, it's fine. Other than, obviously mentally, and knowing you've got this sword of Damocles over your head, but you can get over that. But physically you go, actually, I'm all right at the minute, like I'm fine. And then the next day, be like, oh no, I'm short of breath, or I've got fatigue levels and whatever.
I was having a chat with my mum about this the other day, actually, and she was like, oh, you're not disabled. And there was kind of this idea of, like, in order to be disabled, you need to be the right kind of disabled to have, like, a disabled badge for parking in your car, or you need walking sticks, or something. I was like, it's a bit more complicated.
I think it's interesting. I think it comes back to that. Here's what people should be, right? Here's the useful way of people. And then, oh no, these people can't do anything at all, right? They're disabled. We'd hate them. They're useless to us. So we discard those people. And then there's chronically ill people who come in the middle and are sometimes one and sometimes the other. And the problem is this, we are a spectrum. Everyone is incapacitated or disabled in some way. And the point is, I think, to make society and physically being in spaces and mentally being in spaces as accessible as possible for everyone. So society is for everyone, but for some reason we've made it for a small group of people who perform at their best, like, in a certain way.
I think there's that feeling of, if you're lucky enough to get those opportunities, you have to, like, bend and contort yourself to fit into their boxes. And if you can't, well, then there's plenty of other people who'd happily have that job. And it's that mindset to me that is just really problematic.
So running ourselves ragged, trying to make this work happen. And obviously, like, my mental health was just like, so for a while I was in a sort of like manic, having a manic episode, and that sort of powered the work for a while. But then there was a huge crash and everything fell apart, and we had a really difficult time getting out of that contract and being paid for the work that we'd done, and had some really horrible interactions with the venue about whether we were cut out to work in the arts or not, whether we were suitable or not. It was really bad. And I didn't have the tools and the language I have now to, like, know that was ableism and call it out.
I think at the centre of the question is resource. So, subsidy is declining. So our local authority subsidy is declining year on year. The Arts Council funding has been, well, more or less at a standstill. So real terms has been frozen, I guess, for several years. But also the demands of the Arts Council have increased. So I think the financial model is complex. So what that means is that, we could, for example, only do 2 session tech days, so just work 10 till 6 rather than 10 till 10. But that would cost money. And if that's costing more money, that money has to come from somewhere else. So, we could maybe then do 1 less production a year, I suppose. But that means the audience is getting to experience 1 less production a year. And we're employing 1 less writer, 1 less director, 1 less designer, et cetera, less per year. So the money has to come from somewhere. So it's partly to do with resource, definitely. I do think it's also, and it's the only model I've ever known, it feels like there was something to do with an energy behind a sort of, as you get nearer, the the tech, and then nearer the first preview, and then nearer opening night, there's something that happens to the adrenaline and the energy of everybody driving towards that common goal, which I think can sometimes ignite a production. But there's a cost to it, isn't there? There's a mental and physical cost to it, for everybody involved, you know, and maybe particularly more so for deaf and disabled artists, for those who are caring, those who are parents, and actually for everybody involved, because I think there's also just burnout does exist in our industry. And the problem with that is, in order to have a sustainable career as a freelancer, you need to do so many jobs a year. So it's not that you can work incredibly hard for 3 months on a production and then take 3 months off to recover. I mean, even that probably presumably wouldn't be mentally, emotionally, or physically that healthy, but at least it would be offset in some way, shape, or form. But you can't even really allow yourself that if you want a sustainable career. So I don't think it is that sustainable as a process. But I think unless we get unless we really relook at how we fund the arts in this country, I don't see it making a significant shift anytime soon. But maybe that's naive.
Somebody started it and everybody else followed. I mean, that's what I think. You know, it's an industry that, I mean, maybe it's guilt. Maybe they think, oh my God, I'm here in this dream space and I've got to look like I'm working and being busy. Otherwise people will be, you know, I've got to go back down to the factory. I don't know. I think there's something there about people's personal practice. There's a lot of busy doing nothing. There's a lot of hours spent with actual if you had the, you know, care and take and time and this and that, and then the carry on 50 hours and the actual end product, same thing. So what is the point of that? I think there's a lot of anxiety around being seen to do, and that's not just down to theatre. That's just the way that sometimes our country works in terms of industry. You know, pick up a broom, make sure you've been seen doing what you're doing.
What seems to me is a value judgment that is made, which is, if I'm being crude about it, you are getting paid money to be an actor, an artist. That means that money you need to earn, and you need to work as hard as possible for the 2 weeks, 3 weeks, however long you've got, in order to prove that you deserve this money, not only for yourself, because work is hard to come by, but also just to prove to everyone that you are a worker.
I think that it's about the people who get into leadership positions are almost always people who have very few barriers, are very privileged people, you know, tend to be neurotypical, able-bodied, white men, you know, every point.
So yeah, I'm still at the whim of producers to an extent, in terms of if you're thinking about overall structure and the way that the whole thing works. So I think that this is sort of pre-COVID, because things did change, and they have, with the things that I'm now doing, which I'll explain in a minute. But before that, I think there was a tension emerging for me between the structures that producers were asking me to work in terms of like, I need you to build a show in 3 weeks or 2 weeks or 4 weeks, you know, sometimes 3 weeks for big shows, where it was Monday to Saturday.
When you're running a building, it's even worse, because you're expected, all right, could you just check your emails from 7 till like 8:30? And then could you have a meeting with finance from 8:30 to 9:30? And then at 9:30, could you just bob into marketing till 10 o'clock? And then you could do your rehearsal 10 to 1. Then we'll have a production meeting 1 till 2. And then 2 till 6, you'll go back into rehearsals. Oh, and then at 6 o'clock, can you pick up a phone call with X? And it's just, you know, it is just impossible for anyone, not particularly for people who are carers or chronically ill or whatever, just for anyone. It's really, really tricky.
But I think the idea of like an advocate, as well as like how we model like leadership in a room, is really, really good, because I think like how we discuss the role, because there's a whole conversation around assistants and associate roles as well. Like, what are those jobs and what do they look like?
So the first part of it is that I work with an access assistant. Her name is Tony D, and she is also an artist. And that was really important to me, that I wanted to work with somebody that had an artistic practice, but was also really invested in the models of care that I was looking at that were coming out of like disability justice and disability activism that was happening in the States. So Tony accompanies me on any of the work that's making. She knows the projects as well as I do. And what it means is that if something happens and I can't be there, but it has to happen because of the timetable, Tony can step in and lead.
Also, that we need to create a culture and have the conversations of allowing those to fail as well, because I think that there'll be a pressure to go, well, you want to do this new way, you know, it better be brilliant. And it's like, it's maybe not going to be. And there might be times where this model is going to fall short, and it's going to mean that work isn't ready or is like, it's different. And that there needs to be space allowed for that as well.
It all starts with the people at the top of the building. If your executive director and your artistic director have got bad working practices, then the whole building's going to have bad working practices. And I think it's as simple as that.
I think there definitely will be some shift, but I think it's a long road, specifically for chronic illness. I think people only just know little bits about it.
They're going to listen. We're talking about a societal change. It's about the social model. It's an utter disgrace if that's not the case, because we are all in society and it's not even the right. It's just what it is. Any other way is just not the way, because what you're saying then is actually whatever the constructors decided is the norm, which is no such thing, is the only way, and everybody else is excluded, and that's just absolutely not acceptable in any shape or form. Let alone the fact that they're paying tax and paying for the subsidised, situation, and so everybody has the right to be part of that. But just in terms of our society, is that who we want to be?
I think the only way that you ever change a system is by creating a new system that is better and makes the old system obsolete.
It's about having more frequent conversations and being able to flag up having a bad day without it feeling like you're causing a fuss or you've reached crisis point and you're not going to be able to carry on with the project, whatever that might be. I think so often so many of us just try and hide things for so long, or kind of or laugh it off in so many ways that then it feels really difficult to admit when you have a hard day.
That we can do the job just as well as other people. That we can. Some of us are better, that sometimes all we need is a bit more time. Sometimes what we need is a bit more than that, but like it's worth it.
I think it's going to take the bigger theatres and then the smaller theatres, and I include ourselves in that, to start trialing some of this to see how it works. But it's just really difficult, isn't it? Because theatre is so expensive to make.
Just conversations, as I just don't think they happen, and it feels like you used the term earlier, coming out, and I think that's exactly what it is. It when you feel like you've got to hold something back and then admit it as kind of almost like a flaw of yours, that's really hard. And I feel like quite often the way that things come out, whether that, and over time, like my narcolepsy is, especially before I was diagnosed, like had a massive effect on my mental health as well, obviously, because like being exhausted all the time and not being able to stay awake for more than 20 minutes at a time is like really detrimental to being, healthy and happy. And I think quite often these things don't come out of people until it's reached a crisis point, and it's, and it should never be that, but it is.
Well, listening's the main thing, isn't it? Rather than forcing your model onto other people, asking what model works for them.
What producer is going to say, oh, that's great, let's give Gary 3 days off now? I maybe it feels like a paradigm shift needs to happen.
But also, like with a more kind of hard-hearted way, I think you get the best work out of people when they feel looked after and are not stressed and exhausted. And I don't think that should be radical to think that way,
I think there's going to be a lot more push to change things, and that's correct. Because it's been a long time coming, really. Yeah.